I'm still trying to get my mind around the district superintendent's math. If you give in the name of a good pastor, you get $50. If I take a pastor, I have to pay him $20,000. I'd like to know what happens to the other $19,950 in that equation, but that's probably a story for another day.
Hey, Dr. Blake, you missed that. I was going to split the $20,000 for the pastors who stayed faithful to SWID.
Well, praise the Lord.
I can't believe someone's questioning the counting mechanisms of a Nazarene.
That's rare. Well, I have much more to say on that subject, but I am getting a filter in my older age, so I'm going to let all of that go. Well, God bless you, my friends. It's good to see you all this morning. I became a pastor in the late year of 1981. I graduated from seminary with the class of '82, but I left the end of November when my coursework was done. So I'm bearing down on 39 years that I have been at this. And there'll be two authors that I refer to. As a matter of fact, what I told Tim, the title is directly taken from the title of a book by Dan B. Allender called Leading with a Limp. And then one of the ones that I have, I believe he may have just come out with another book, Samuel Chand. There'll be several things. I tried to tell you what cows I milk. I can't remember all of them, so it's hard for me to know where they stop and someone else begins. But my heroes are pastors. The other day have you ever been reminded after the fact of something you either said aloud or you said to yourself? I was at a particularly difficult place in a pastorate where the people were, the board, the leaders, and we were kind of in a difficult spot, a loggerhead. And I don't know if I said it internally or I said it out loud. No one heard me, I don't think, other than the Lord. And it was sort of a prayer. God, I don't see how you can even work through these people. And it dawned on me sometime later that when I made that statement, either to myself or maybe just said it out loud, that statement at that moment said more about what I thought about God than what I thought about the people. To say, God, these people are so extreme, they're so dysfunctional, they're so headstrong that you can't work through them. In our Bibles, God has worked through some very difficult people. And I'm looking at your pictures. Most of you I don't really know well. Some of you I do. And he's chosen to work through all of us. I'm going to talk about the latter part of Jacob's story. And if you remember there in the 27th chapter, when Rebekah begins to try to work with Jacob to cheat the old man Isaac out of the blessing that belonged to Esau. From the very moment that Jacob and Esau came into the world, there was conflict. You know, when we name children, we either name them after our families or we like the way it sounds with our last name. Their names meant something, and to grab your brother's heel and try to get out first, his name means the heel grabber, the deceiver. That'd be quite a reputation to live up to. And then we see Rebekah and Isaac. And if you thought dysfunctional families was a 21st century phenomena, they could be the poster children for a dysfunctional family. And yet God works through them. Here's my definition of a dysfunctional home. It's any home where two or more people live. And if you're single, you have a 50-50 chance of living in a dysfunctional home as well. All of us have a story. One of my favorite definitions for pastors is you are the chief storyteller where you live. You and I have the opportunity to tell the story of how God has redeemed people. My great-grandmother was converted in 1918 in Paulding, Ohio, at the starting of the Church of the Nazarene. Her two sisters had been saved in the tent meeting that started that church, which is about 25 miles east of Fort Wayne, Indiana. My great-grandmother was a widow with two small children, and she was far from God, had no spiritual background. My great aunt asked the lady pastor to go call on my great-grandmother, and she did, and she was converted, and the trajectory of that part of the family began to change. And then you fast forward to my birth, was that my mother was a young lady who had gotten pregnant by a married man who happened to be Jewish in conservative northern Indiana. I'll even tell you the year I was born, because your age is like being pregnant. You can't hide it forever, it's going to get out. I was born in 1956. My father abandoned my mother. She moved in with my grandparents. She subsequently went in and out of relationships. And that's another story. But once in a while, when we like to beat up on the church of what's wrong, I have to tell you, if it wasn't for Jesus and Grandma and the Southside Church of the Nazarene in Fort Wayne, I wouldn't be here today. The men and women of that church took me, and I never felt you have to understand, what I just described to you doesn't seem that traumatic today, but in 1956, that was an interesting story. And so I feel like I need to stop and say, I'm thankful for the grace that was given to me and the fact that God has worked his will in my life. And so I've been very cautious to say, God, you can't work, if you can't work through these people, because he's chosen to work through all of us. And it doesn't matter where you came from or how you got here. It's the fact that God will work through anyone. You know the story of Jacob and Esau, Jacob cheating him out of the birthright and then moving away. I don't know if you've ever heard that Peter Drucker describe what are the four most challenging jobs in the United States of America. You can Google it and find it. The first one is, and I'm going to move past this one rather quickly, to be president of the United States. The second one is to be the president of a college or university, is one of the four toughest responsibilities. He says the next one is to be the president of a hospital. And then you're kind of thinking, where's he going to go next? And here is what he says: to be the pastor of a church is one of the four toughest responsibilities. A lot of that has to do with the complexity of being a pastor, and all of those do. And then it just seems that when you're in leadership and pastoral leadership, there seems to be a magnet around us that attracts pain. So in the midst of all that's going on in the day today, I try to remind myself often, why did I go into the ministry? I mean, did I stumble into a job fair in high school and flunked out everything else and said, well, maybe I'll try to be a pastor? How hard can that be? We believe that it's more than a job, but that it's a calling from God, that we received a calling. Basil said that we are ambidextrous people, those of us in the ministry, because on one hand, we have God's grace and his blessings, and with the other hand, we have all of the life's difficulties that come to people and to ourselves, and it's that balancing. Well, one of the statements that has captured my attention is, if you're leading, you're bleeding. Now, I don't know what your story is, but I'm guessing I'm looking at some folks who in the last 6 months have shed a little blood somewhere. If everyone agrees with you, if everyone has agreed with you over the last 6 months, please send me your email. I'll pay Tim $20,000 to have you on the team if everyone has helped and been glad at everything that you've said in every decision. One of the other statements he says is, you cannot lead higher than your threshold of pain. I don't know that anyone told me. I didn't really think about it when I entered ministry. I think in those, everybody at my house loved our preacher, loved everybody at church. I didn't know the church people fought. I'm sure they fought when I was young. I just wasn't aware of it. But let's go back to Jacob. Rebecca overhears that Esau has threatened to kill Jacob. She sends Jacob to live with relatives, and he's away. And then he hears from the Lord, who says, go back to the land where you're from, and I will bless you. But he's afraid. Jacob is going to have to face something just like all of us are going to have to face. And Jacob had to face his fear factor. What was he afraid of? Well, I mean, he was afraid of his brother. But it's time to go back, and it's time to face it. Now, the great thing about we folks of faith is we believe we never face these things all by ourselves. If you go to the 32nd chapter of Genesis, Jacob is now kind of getting all the folks together, the wives, the children, the belongings, and they're starting that march that gives you all the appearance in the beginning of the 32nd chapter that it's a death march. We're going to march and try to placate and buy Esau off. And they tell him in verse 3 that your brother Esau is coming and 400 men are coming with him. And in verse 7 of that chapter, in great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him in two groups. I don't know exactly what the leadership strategy Jacob had, other than perhaps divide and conquer. After he kills the first group, maybe he'll get tired by the time he gets to me at the end. I'm not exactly sure what his leadership message is, but he told all of them, be sure as you go and you present these gifts and my wives and my children, make sure you tell them that Jacob is bringing up the rear. I am going, your servant Jacob is coming. And verse 21 says, so Jacob's gifts went on ahead of him, but he spent the night in camp. The interesting thing that's going to happen is, besides all of his family and all of his possessions and all of the things he's done, there's going to come a moment when Jacob is going to be all alone, and he's going to be thinking and praying. And so in verse 22, it says, that night Jacob got up and took his two wives, his two maidservants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. And after he'd sent them across the stream, he sent over all of his possessions. So Jacob was left alone. I find that an interesting story. He has spent his life trying to get, trying to be, trying to have, trying to force the issue. And here, as he's facing his fears, and he's also going to have to face his Esau. What's your Esau today? And what's your fear? What's that unfinished business that all of us here may have today? And so Jacob is just there by himself. All his possessions are gone. And then it says, so Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. Now, in seminary, I was taught that this is a theophany, that some Bible folks, as you know, believe this was the pre-incarnate Christ. This was a messenger from God. However you want to say it, he was not wrestling with just another fellow human being. And the man wrestled with him till daybreak. The interesting thing to notice in the language is that for once, Jacob is not the aggressor. For it says that it is the man wrestled with him till daybreak. I've had to do in some recent days I feel like I've been wrestling with the Lord. A crisis like we're going through serves to remind all of us fundamentally that there are things that are out of our control. Now, we always know that, and we say it intellectually, but we're learning it on ourselves. And the thing that I noticed about Jacob as he's on the trip back to face his fear, he sort of is modeling what all of us have to do. You and I are called to stand on the edge of the cliff and jump, and to move forward, or to take a step and wondering where it is going to go. And so the Lord wrestles with him. And it says the man saw that he couldn't overpower him, and he touched the socket of Jacob's hip. So that his hip was wrenched, and when he wrestled with the man. And the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." I have a feeling that most of us have been crying out that kind of a prayer sometime during these recent days. God, I can't do this on my own. I can't make it. And of all the things we need to hold on, Jacob sent all of his possessions that he had been striving for all of his life to have. And he's saying to the Lord, I won't let you go until you bless me. And the interesting thing is the man says to him, "What is your name?" Now, oftentimes when there are questions from God toward us in the Bible, when he said to Adam and Eve, "Where are you?" God is not asking us questions because he doesn't know the answer. God is asking to see if we know the answer. Where are you? What is your name? Now, he wasn't just interested in his name. As you know, in Hebrew, your name is a summary of your character. He'd been the heel grabber, the deceiver, the one who is going to push and pull and yank and get into first place. And he says, who are you? What is your name? And he says, I'm Jacob. I'm the heel grabber. And then he said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and men, and you have overcome. This is an image in the Old Testament of transformation, that it is about one's character. Here is a picture of Jacob, who has been striving for all of these years, 40 years, to receive what God was willing to give him. And once there's been forgiveness, once there's been transformation, something really happens. But one of the things that I see here is that when God gets a hold of us, we'll never be the same. And when God gets a hold of people and groups and places, they're never the same. God is saying to Jacob, don't settle for trying to do it on your own. Allow me to help you. 21 years of anxiety, of living out there on his own, wondering every day, will Esau find me? What's going to happen? And then he said, I'm going to call the place Peniel, saying, it is because I saw God face to face and my life was spared. Here is the interesting thing I think that is a model in pastoral leadership. We need to be conquered by our dependency, that we have nothing to offer. We have nothing in ourselves. All of our possessions be sent across the river. We will be conquered when we learn to depend upon God. One of the things about what you folks do that is so difficult is that as a leader, as a pastoral leader, if you do it long enough, you will discover that you disappoint everybody eventually. Everyone becomes disappointed with something you do. The interesting thing is the complexity. The complexity, the things that are pulling at you. One of the things that I say on a podcast every week, and I get a lot of people making fun of me, but it's a truism, it can be overused, is I know that every one of you today are doing better than you think you are. Here's what I've discovered. You heard that Brother Tim said that he pastored a church where I had been before him, and how all the people loved me. Well, I want to tell you how that works. The people who have always been the most fond of me are the people from where I used to be. They got really fond of me once I was gone. You never realize until you announce you're leaving somewhere the impact you have on people many times. And so I know that our pastors are doing better than you think you are. Here's what happens when I come into a church. The pastor will say, this or that, we need to do this, we need to do that. But because I'm not there very often, I can see some real changes that have taken place. And I think all of us so much focus on what we want to improve and what needs to get better and how we need to do this, that I think it's hard for us at times to take a step back and realize God really has helped us. We really have done certain things. I don't know how close, I know it's down there close to where our two districts come together, but we have a little church in Madison, Indiana, which is, as you know, probably a nice little town on the Ohio River. And in my first 4 years, we had 3 pastors there. And things had gotten so bad that the district had to make the mortgage payment for 2 months, and I was on my way to close it down. And then there was an ordained elder who I think had been on the SWID district. Fortunately, Tim wasn't here then. I didn't have to pay $20,000. And he was retired anyway. He was a retired chaplain, Wayne Edwards. I don't know if any of you know who Wayne was. I did not know him. Our zone facilitator for that part of the district said, there's this man, he's retired, he's a Nazarene elder, he lives in town. Maybe you could put him in there. And here's how you change when you become a district superintendent. I didn't ask for his qualifications. I asked, is he breathing? And can he stand up and preach? If that's the case, he's qualified. So Brother Edwards went in there. The church had no money. Now, fast forward 6 years, and he had stage 4 cancer and then actually got COVID. And his funeral was just about 3 weeks ago, about a month ago. But as he was in those last stages, I went down, and here I was again in that place where I'm wondering, what in the world am I going to do? And God sent an elder, a retired elder from Missouri, whose daughter lives there, who I never had met. But I wondered what I would find in that church. It's one of my farthest away from the center part of the district. And because of COVID, obviously, we hadn't been much of anywhere. And when I went in there, I met with the board. They had $35,000 in the bank. They'd gone from 8 people to about 40 people. And I was just amazed. And on my way home, I thought, I don't believe we ever honored Pastor Edwards at a district assembly. I don't remember him receiving any kind of an accolade. But I got quite emotional thinking, we wouldn't have much going on anywhere if it weren't for people like that who stand in the gap. And though we may not think a church of 38 or 40 is that big a deal, it is a big deal. And I'm not sure that our economy of scale is the same as God's. And so here's what I know about all of you. We wouldn't have the church, we wouldn't be the church if it weren't for called ministers like you out there day in and day out, taking that sort of call out to where you live. So I want to say thank you to pastors. I try to say it to our own. One of the things that happened to me in pastoral ministry was I started out wanting people to like me, and learned about 8 months in that probably was not a very good thing to try. And And here's what's hurtful in ministry, and you all know this. When you have to make a tough decision and then people react. But I want to remind you that we have to depend on God, and at times it is difficult, but his presence is there. I think I'm going to stop because I'm a person who can talk with or without information, and I can continue to go on. Brother Crump, I don't know if someone wants to say something or ask something. I'll take a pause. I'll take a pause of a breath here.
How about we do this? How about somebody with a question out there? You've had the opportunity to have someone who's been in the fire in a lot of different ways, and your question may mean that you're in the fire or you're going to be in the fire. And so I'm going to be quiet, and if you've got a question, you can either type it in the chat section or unmute yourself and go ahead and ask away.
This reminds me of being in Nazarene Seminary years ago when Dr. Greider was teaching systematic theology, and he would say, does anyone have a question? And we would think, we don't even know what you're talking about. How in the world could we ask the question? I'm wondering if that's what you are thinking.
I'll be the first. You know, I think as a pastor, my biggest struggle is when you invest in a family so much and all of a sudden for no reason they leave or they feel like something changes and then they end up leaving the church, and then all of a sudden I try not to take it personal, but it's hard not to. And you're thinking, okay, do I invest in somebody else again and they leave? And so I've got to be very careful that I don't put myself in a situation where I take things too personal, because then it would affect the ministry that I have. But that's all I face all the time. And it's just like, you know, we had a young family just the day that was thinking about leaving because, you know, our programs have changed a little bit with the COVID, and, you know, we ended up having to transfer somebody else that had left and went to another church. But we invest in that family. We've been part of them. We've helped them out. And then all of a sudden you try not to take that personal. So I would look for advice that would help me to overcome that bridge. It seems like I keep crossing that bridge every once in a while.
Well, when anyone comes to meet you, Pastor, and they say, now, Pastor, I don't want you to take this personally. Get ready, because you are going to take it personally. There is no pill to take. I've been there. I was a church planter from seminary, and that's back in the days where there was no training. We believed in ecclesiastical Darwinism. If you survived, you must have been called. And you just, and away you went. And I remember as we were digging it out, and it was very small, the first time, Mark, that it happened to me, I wish it was the last, but it happened all the time. They said, we're going to leave. It's nothing personal. We want our daughter to be in a larger church with a youth group. And, you know, here I'm sitting there scrambling, trying to dig 20 or 30 people out with the Lord's help. And I felt in my heart, well, you know, if I wasn't the pastor, I'd go with you. Surely there has to be something better than this. I think what it comes down to is there's no way for us to say that doesn't hurt. And that's probably about what Chand and Allender mean about leading. The threshold of our leadership is our ability to withstand pain. I don't have any magical words that will take the sting out of that. I think it's where we have to come back to the call, and then to what I tell pastors, a self-awareness, in that there's not a person out there who doesn't experience it. The other thing that I believe, I don't know that I can prove this, I'm not sure that when people tell us what the reason they're leaving is, that it always is the absolute reason they're leaving. I think oftentimes there are other things.
Hello.
I think he may have froze.
Yeah, I think he did. Anybody else froze?
I'm here. Frozen.
That's that expensive high-speed internet in the city.
I guess that's it. I know other people, it could be a Zoom issue because I know other people, Jane Muncie was having trouble. Let's see, Ron, I think dropped on us, didn't he? I've got a feeling he will join us. Why don't we keep having the conversation? Because I think the whole bleeding, if you're leading, you're bleeding. Oh, here he is. You back with us, Ron?
Yeah, some of the sheep cut my cable cord, evidently. I'm not sure what happened.
Well, we thought it was the high-speed internet that's in Indianapolis.
I can't even find you. Can you see me?
We can.
I can't see any of you, so God bless you. It's probably better to enjoy it, not being able to see. Let me try this again here real quick. There you are. One of the things as a follow-up to Mark, that I am an interim pastor right now as well as the DS. So that's kind of put me back out there into what pastors are facing. And my first Sunday at this church, which used to be a church of a little over 400, and they're running in person, maybe 150, 160. And so the very first Sunday I was there, I had these two statements back to back out on the parking lot where we were greeting people. The first lady said, "You need to shut down all of the internet in here and do not do the service online and force everybody to come back." And then she moved on. She said her piece. The next person said, "I just want you to know I came this Sunday, but I'll not be back until there are 2 vaccines and a partridge in a pear tree, and we're hiding under our beds until then." And these were back to back. Well, you're set up that even if you go to the middle, you make nearly everyone mad. And the lady who made the first statement about taking all of the online down so that people are forced to come back, came back the second Sunday and said to me, "I see you didn't do what I told you to do, or asked you to do," she said. I said, "No, ma'am, and we're not going to, because there are people with immune," I went through the company line there. So I think, Mark, we're in a nearly, and all of you, we're in a nearly impossible situation of you have to determine with God as your witness what is the best way to go, knowing that we're going to have to change on the dime because none of us know what's happening next week. And we just have to continue experimenting with it. So welcome to the world where you get to make everyone mad. It's sort of like being a district superintendent. You get to make everyone mad all of the time, and it's wonderful. But Mark, that's a tough one. That's why we have to stay close to the Lord. It is painful when the sheep that you've invested in leave. There's no other way around that.
Dr. Blake, I went away for a couple of weeks of vacation, and could not encourage people enough to do that. One of the things that I realized when I actually on the latter end of my time away, I was by myself. I kind of realized I had not taken the best of personal care of myself, soul care.
Right.
And I've realized since I've been back, that's very obvious to me that I've been trying to care for sheep, and I've said it many times, trying to care for sheep that you do not see has been so frustrating and heart-wrenching, but not taking care of myself. So what would you suggest, in these days, how we can better, as pastors, take care of ourselves so we can better take care of our families? and
Yeah.
in the church.
Part of the difficulty that I discovered, and like Denny, I made this discovery because we had pretty much shut our office down, and I was working out of the home. My wife is an ordained elder and is a hospital chaplain at the hospital that had the most COVID patients in the state of Indiana, Eskenazi Hospital. So she had been there with the iPad when the people are saying goodbye to their loved ones, a very traumatic time. We were scheduled to take a trip to Florida in February that got postponed, or in March rather, got postponed 3 times until just recently. And Denny, I would make that same. I didn't realize how tired and worn out I was until I got out of my home. And I think if you're working out of your home, it's very hard to blur, the line blurs, and time off doesn't feel like time off used to be because you had a different physical location. I'm a big believer in morning and evening routines. If you've ever listened to my podcast, I'm almost hyper about that. For me, I am a morning person. So I spend my time in the Bible, and I journal, and I read. That has nothing to do with being necessarily anything to do with being a DS and a pastor. I think part of the problem is for us pastors was now we're at home, so we don't even have that demarcation. Because we are preparing sermons, it feels like we are with the Bible all the time. And I think we forget about our own soul and our own devotional life and our own time with the Lord. And so I have intentionally made that out. My wife and I try to take Fridays off, and as that's a day off for her. So we come to your district quite often on our days off. We go to Nashville, Indiana, not because we think it's the greatest place in the world, though it's wonderful, but it gets you out of town. We walk around. We may eat somewhere. Now, we didn't then, but I think exercise is another one. I'm sort of like, because I've lost 65 pounds, I'm sort of like the reformed prostitute now. I'm telling people that the thing that has helped me most during all of this, besides Jesus, is physical exercise, because whatever it does for us physically, it does something for us emotionally and mentally, to exert ourselves and to work out. And so when I couldn't get into the gym, I walked through the neighborhood. I think self-care, when I was coming up in the church, we were, bless God, we weren't going to rust out. We were going to wear out. And we thought that made us more spiritual. But physical exercise, spiritual disciplines, they are absolutely vital. And so I know that sounds like a speech. So Denny, I don't know, but I've been going and asking the boards to let the pastors take time away. They have to. This has been an unusual season. And so I advocate that self-care is absolutely essential.
That's even a bigger problem for those of us who are bivocational.
Yes.
I have not taken a vacation in 10 years that I've been at my church, because, I'll take 2 or 3 Sundays a year that I won't be there. But other than that, but I've never, and I don't think it's in my DNA to do that. It's one of those things of, and trying to find that time for your personal devotion. And I'll be doing a personal, it's like, oh, that's preachable. And then I end up working with a sermon from that. And, and I don't know how to separate that time.
I don't know that you have to particularly separate it, but if I ever take one of you and have to send Tim $20,000, tell him to divide it up and you can all take a trip somewhere. I go back to what Abraham Lincoln talked about when he said if he had to cut down a tree, that he'd spend the majority on the time of sharpening the axe. And so I think that because we're in a different day and age, and being many of you being bivocational, even if it's just a few hours somewhere, walking in the woods or doing something different, we have to intentionally work those things in. We can't keep running at the same speed continually. We have to back off and I would say back off with and spend time with family and others and get away. I don't know if this is true for you, but in my days when I was under the load of pastoring, just getting away for an hour or two and doing something nonsensical or family oriented, not that family is nonsensical, but not anything where I was under a time pressure. The people looked better when I got back. They didn't seem as mean and nasty as I remembered them, even 3 or 4 hours before. So I think just that sharpening the saw, and probably the most spiritual thing some of you can do, as I'm looking at your pictures today, is go take a nap. That may be the most spiritual thing any of us could do, is to get some rest. And since I don't live on your district and nobody knows who I am or cares less, I give you permission, my children, take a nap in Jesus' name and don't feel guilty.
Hey, Ron, what's the name of your podcast?
Dr. Ron's Words of Wisdom. It's on iTunes, Stitcher, anywhere you go. I came across the guy who I had no aspirations of starting a podcast. And the podcast is not overtly Christian, although it is at sometimes. I never disguise the fact that I'm a pastor. But it's on leadership. When it was first started, which was a year ago, May, it was on iTunes New and Noteworthy on 2 occasions. So it goes into 81 countries, 168 metro areas, and 50 states. And I think today is somewhere between 50 and 60,000 downloads.
Wow.
And I don't know how that happened. I've not advertised it. I mean, paid advertised it. But it's on just things I've observed and learned about leadership over the years, or heard others talk about, or have experienced.
Any other questions?
I think you've got 1 or 2 in the chat there.
Okay. Someone says, how does one deal with gossip within the community about the church? They said, this creates pain and bleeding, not only with the pastor, but also the leadership of the local church. Any words of wisdom?
Well, I have a few. I think one is the church has either consciously or unconsciously put sins in lists. These sins are really terrible. And if you need to know what they are, just look on Facebook. And people identify the sins that really get them cranked up. Yet, gossip in the Bible is listed in that same category. I think it's something we don't take as seriously. And I think it is something that needs to be, when I say confronted, I don't mean getting angry, but I think I have a theory about these kinds of things that I can't get many people to deal with, to agree with me. But it doesn't change the fact that I feel that I'm right. When I go to churches and I look at their handbooks, I don't have to read very far to realize most of the policies in the handbook don't need to be a policy. They needed to be a hard conversation with one person who was doing something stupid. But we didn't have the courage to do so. We wrote a policy handcuffing everyone else because we're afraid to go and talk to people face to face and say, this cannot stand. This is not the way Jesus would want us to go. And then I also, on the area of gossip, give a warning to pastors. We have to make sure that what we tell people, we are also modeling ourselves. And therefore, if we are gossiping about other people and putting people down, because here's the problem in America today, everyone knows how to do everyone else's job but their own. Everyone is an expert on how you should do your job, how I should do my job, how this, that, the other, but we don't hardly know, I don't mean us, but many people don't know how to do their own. I think we underestimate the impact that gossip going unchecked. And in the church, there's many places to disguise gossip. Prayer chains are marvelous places to disguise gossip as a form of a prayer request. And I could go on. And I just think we need to make sure that our speech is also what we are modeling, because if our people have to choose between what we say and what we model, they will follow what we model, because that's what they think we really. But I would also tell you, pastors, if you're going to have to confront someone in the church over gossip, you need to take someone with you, because anyone who gossips, lying is the second cousin to gossip. And again, I do it with love, but please don't put one more policy in your handbook about gossip. It's already written in the Bible, and that trumps your handbook. And before you think about writing a general letter to the people of the church about the evils of gossip, it'd probably be far simpler and more effective if you went to the person responsible and had a conversation with them. Will it solve the problem? No, but I think a gossip will put everybody else on notice that if you start doing that, the pastor and somebody from the board is going to come and have a conversation. That will spread like wildfire. That was my methodology.
All right. Any other questions? I don't think I'm missing anything.
I got a question about how do you distinguish, or how do you keep avenues open for people who have maybe some legitimate insight? In other words, sometimes I've learned even from people who were critical of me that they weren't out for my best interest, but I did learn from them and they gave me insights. It's just harder to take, from a friend. It's easier to take some iron and sharpening iron. And then when somebody's not going about things the right way, or they don't have your best interest in mind, how do you keep avenues open by which you can receive that feedback? How do you distinguish that feedback? And then how do you, in other words, it's like I'm not just plowing through, ignoring some stuff that's probably I need to hear, kind of stuff.
Well, the last church that I pastored, you can look my record up. I'm always hesitant when I have this many Nazarenes on one page that your relatives go there to church. But it has historically been known as one of the more difficult congregations. I was there 8.5 years, and I'm the second longest serving pastor in the history of the church. But we loved it there. But in our staff meeting, Jared, one thing that happened is we had a lot of people who were very critical. I had one guy confront staff members for the way we were serving the communion elements because he didn't think it was reverent, and it was what I had told the staff to do. And it was just all the time there was something. And I remembered at one staff meeting, our staff meetings were on Monday, and the staff immediately, when 2 or 3 people's names would be mentioned, it just sort of got blown off like, well, how legitimate can that be? They're against everything. Until I said in the staff meeting, I paused and I said, I get that. We all get criticized heavily here. But before we just blow it off, let's start doing this. Let's put it on the table. And before we dismiss it, and before we start taking it personally and reacting, let us always look for, is there a kernel of truth in the criticism that if it hadn't been from that person, and as Jared said, been from a friend, we might have received it. And I hesitate, but I think I'm correct that probably over time, I've been helped as much from my critics as I have been from my friends, because they have given me insight that my friends would not more than likely had the courage to tell me. So it also goes with the fact that in my lifetime, there have been mountaintops, experiences with the Lord, and I've also gone through some tremendous valleys, some very difficult days. 2019 was personally the worst year for my wife and I. She had breast cancer. We had a situation with her parents. I had a great brouhaha with a local church and pastor on the district. And I somewhat feel responsible for 2020 because coming home from Detroit on New Year's Eve day, driving down Interstate 69, I said to Suzanne, I will sure be glad to see 2019 over. 2020 can't be this bad. So I promise I will never say that again. The thing is, as I look back on 2019, which was a horrific year for us personally, I learned some invaluable lessons during that time. I learned that when you can't count on hardly anyone else, God is faithful and he brings you through. And I learned that you can trust him with and for everything. So I think about criticism. I have learned invaluable lessons from my critics. So I would just pause to say, before you just dismiss it as they're a crank and they're never happy, and that's probably true, but they could be saying something, if you dig down underneath there, that really may be something that I need to be aware of or I need to work on. So just because they're critics doesn't mean that once in a while they have something legitimate. Even a blind squirrel finds an acorn periodically. And so that's how I've tried to handle it. Before I dismiss it, is there a lesson to be learned?
Those are good words, Ron. Anyone else?
What happened to, Dr. Ron, what happened to the church you planted?
Well, interestingly enough, the first one was in Corpus Christi, Texas in 1981. It was on the, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's on the Gulf of Mexico. It's right outside the Naval Air Base. The church grew fairly rapidly. It was in a very impoverished, rugged part of town. We used to have 6 or 7 churches in Corpus Christi. I think there may be 1 or 2. That church merged with another church. I replanted a church, the Nazarene Church in Syracuse, Indiana. Was there for 7.5 years, and that church also closed, actually merged with another church. So that's my track record. They ran well for a spell.
But they merged with another group.
Yes, the group merged. The one in Syracuse, I don't know if you're familiar with Syracuse, it's a town of 2,700. And the church, again, got good size, but it's a vacation area. It's up where Lake Wawasee, the largest natural lake in Indiana. And there's, so it just had a few rough spots along the way afterward.
Thank you.
All right, if you're wanting information on learning code, I sent that in to you. And so that should be on the chat section. In a couple of weeks, October 8th, I have Michael Thompson, legal counsel from the denomination. And he's going to actually have 2 sessions that I think are absolutely vital for you. The 10 Commandments for staying out of legal trouble. And the other one is trending legal issues. And so it'll probably be about a 2-hour session and also will be recorded. And that's on October 8th. And other than that, anybody got any questions for me very quickly? And after that, I'm going to ask Darren Nossa to close us in prayer. But any questions at all? Okay, I hear silence. Darren, why don't you pray for us, pray a blessing upon Dr. Blake. And Ron, I want to say a huge thank you for just your continued ministry to the Church of the Nazarene and really beyond that. And thanks also for sharing the podcast. And hopefully, I greatly encourage you pastors, podcasts are something I listen to. I've been doing a lot of walking. And those things, it just helps me. I walk a little faster usually, when I'm listening to something somebody's saying. So just encourage you to do that. But Darren, if you would, close us in prayer.
All right. Father, thank you for the day. I pray that even seeing one another today would bring encouragement to us as we realize, brothers and sisters, with the call we're doing. Thank you for a word today that reminds us we're accomplishing more than sometimes we see. Thank you for Dr. Blake. Pray that you would continue to bless him and use him as he shares his wisdom. Continue to lead Dr. Tim as he leads our district. Father, I even pray this day that in so many different things that we will be a part of, that you will just somehow stamp even more deeply upon our hearts and minds that as you have called us, you will continue to equip and lead us by your Spirit. Encourage our hearts this day, I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much. It was great to be with you.
Thank you. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you.